Hello, and welcome once again to my next video, talking some more about civilians during the Civil War. And where we left off on July 4, 1863, and the Siege of Vicksburg ending. Now, many people agree, many historians say that the end of the siege, combined with the defeat at Gettysburg just the day earlier, devastated the Confederacy, and as a result they were never really able to overcome those losses, and it's kind of the turning point in the war, even though it's going to drag out for another 2 years. So the civilians of Vicksburg, after spending 47 days in caves living that cave life, they are now under the control of the Federal Army, and they will remain so until even after the war ends. Two final towns I've been able to specifically research are Petersburg, Virginia, and the nearby City Point. Now, City Point's about 10 miles away, and they're both quite close to Richmond. Petersburg was the site of some of the bloodiest conflicts in the final months of the war. Ulysses S. Grant had been promoted to General in Chief of the Union Army in early 1864 as a result of his continual successes in the West. And in June of that year, he took steps to take Richmond and end the war. He decided to go through Petersburg, as it was a railroad hub and as well as the second largest city in Virginia. Now, the siege took quite a few months, but there were also many battles in that area around that siege line. And so we also had a lot of instances of trench warfare and smaller battles around that time. And many civilians of Petersburg were caught in that siege, which lasted until March of 1865. The civilians of the town often had to take in wounded soldiers, which they had done all throughout the war. Civilians like young woman Margaret Beckwith, she was in her early 20s. She wrote about the many men who needed help and the many soldiers that they brought into their home to care for. And her father was also a doctor, so that was another reason that they brought so many ill and wounded men into their home to take care of. Many civilians were able to flee the countryside west of town, as most of the fighting was happening to the east, so they always had the opportunity to go west. But the conditions out there were horrible. Many of them were staying in tents or lean tos, and so a lot of them decided to come back into town and wait out the siege there. The writings of wife and mother Sarah Pryor describe this, and she also gives a little bit of information about what life was like for women who followed their soldier husbands when they could, as she did that with her husband Roger Pryor. Nearby City Point was also heavily influenced by the war. Once Grant arrived to access Richmond through Petersburg, he turned City Point into his headquarters and the base of his operations. And almost overnight, the once small town became one of the busiest ports in the entire world. Families like the Eppies of Appomattox Manor and the Woods family of Weston House, including 12-year-old Emma, fled City Point when the Federal Army arrived. But the civilians that stayed at times would attempt to help the Confederate scouts in the area, such as Molly Tatum, a young woman who often gave information to Major General Wade Hampton's cavalrymen. And she's also kind of credited with the success of what is known as the Beefsteak Raid, where Hampton's cavalry raided one of the farms where the Union Army was keeping a lot of their beef stock, and so they were able to get a lot of food from that attack. Now, Molly's story is told in Forward to What Lies Ahead. It's a really fascinating tale, and I get really excited even just thinking about it. So once again, I won't give too much away. It's about all the time that we have today, and I am looking forward to talking next time, a little bit more about the Civil War and the civilians and how the end of the war really affected them as well. Talk about total war, what it was, and how it affected the individuals there. So, thank you once again for joining me, and I hope you have a wonderful day.